Welcome, CPAC members. As you know, I'm Michelle McIntosh Ross, Principal Planner with the City of Milton. The Comprehensive Plan Project Management team and I have been working to compile the information that we will use to vet all the issues within the scope of the Comprehensive Plan. Since our last CPAC meeting on November 10th, 2020, we have compiled a good bit of information that we want you to have in advance of the next CPAC meeting, which is scheduled for January 28th, 2021. Where these topics will be discussed. Instead of dumping hundreds of pages of reading material on you to sift through, we felt that we should send along an accompanying video narrative to help explain the information. The first of 3 presentations is a market analysis presentation that was delivered to the steering committee on December 11th, 2020. Mr. David Lobb from the consulting firm Noel Consulting Group presented the information and took questions. There will be 2 other presentations on land use by Bob Buscemi, the Interim Director for Community Development. I hope that after you watch the videos, you will agree with the steering committee members who found these presentations eye-opening, important, and very relevant. My apologies for the abrupt start of the recording of the video and for the introductions not being captured in the recording. But as I mentioned earlier, David Lobb from Noel Consulting will be presenting following my introduction.
You see this very large range. And again, when we break that out, that'll help tighten this range a little bit. But as of right now, obviously the stuff that's on with sewer and a little bit smaller lot is more this 600, whereas the bigger, more estate product is getting to the kind of 2. And of course, some stuff is pegging even above 2, but this is sort of like the bulk of the sales volume that we're seeing is there. About $200 a square foot. It can justify around $175 an acre for this kind of product. Again, there's some generalities in here. There's always examples where we can push that a little bit more if it has sewer, if it's a little greater density, things like that. But generally, the average is kind of right there. Again, I kind of mentioned we're hitting this spot in the market where your market depth is starting to decline the more we're pushing above about 800K. Moving on, townhome product. We see even stronger demand for townhome product. This is a function largely of price point, but about 40 to 60 units of townhomes per year. This also has a range within it. You have everything from what we might call more of a mid-market product that might be in the 300s or low 400s, up to examples you have, particularly closer to crabapple, things like that, where it's a more of a luxury product. In most cases, that luxury product kind of stops around 600. You do have a couple examples that peg a little bit higher than that. It is similar at around 200 a square foot. And you can see, though, because of the density, obviously this can only be done where we have sewer, but because of the density, it supports much higher land values. This is something I can tell you that if part of your policy wants to think about redevelopment of any older commercial or things like that, this is one of the land uses that's important to consider because it has the ability to support a higher value that might justify redevelopment of perhaps some older uses. I think we made a note on here, and if there's any political challenge with anything we're saying in here, that's why we call it draft. If you guys want us to change this, edit this, we're fine to do that. But we do make the note that, part of the reason that this product can be attractive in a community is you get to some price points under 400, which can be nice for more of a starter family in the market. So something to keep in mind. Rental apartments. This is interesting because I think you all see this. Your neighbor to the south with Alpharetta has experienced phenomenal growth with apartments. And that is, it's coming your way. Almost every municipality in the region is getting faced with this. It's a combination of kind of where this land use is in the market cycle, but also demographic forces primarily millennials that are in this kind of prime age, but also we're seeing it from the top end with empty nesters downsizing and not always, finding a for sale option that they want to do. In some cases, considering a lifestyle change to more of renting. And so there's a lot of demand for this product type. We've made the note that it could be up to 500 units in this 5-year period. However, currently you have, zoning constraints that are limiting this. So you're not really seeing hardly any of this demand today. If it was something you wanted to consider in certain areas, we could debate and talk about how much that is. We could think about that in the comp plan. We made a note on here just based on some of your peer cities, which there's an exhibit in here that shows that, but based on some of your peer cities, we think this could be maybe around 200 units every 4 to 5 years. So maybe kind of one smaller size project every sort of 5-year cycle. Again, purely market driven. We're not getting into the politics of that. That's up to you all to decide. This is kind of the price point of that product and what that justifies in land value. Again, because of the higher land value where you have sewer, this can be an important use in redevelopment scenarios. Of note, this price point, as you get to kind of higher, closer to this $2 a square foot, that can justify structured parking. As if we're more of the $1.75 or so range, that does not justify structured parking. So you're sort of right there in the middle of this, where in really strong sites, again, walkable, and strong sites for this product type generally mean walkable mixed-use areas with good proximity to jobs. Those kind of areas, you could potentially have this support structured parking. But elsewhere, if we were looking at it as more of a, further to the north, maybe in the city, it'd be more of a garden style product with surface parking. Within apartments, we have another niche product line here that we're seeing a lot of movement on. We work across the country, so we see this all over the U.S. We are seeing it in the Atlanta region as well, which is apartments that are called 55 plus or active adult apartments. These generally, they're called 55 plus. They're often deed restricted, where you can't have anyone under that age living in there, except for maybe a small portion if they're related to a leaseholder. But these generally attract folks about 5 to 10 years older than what they market. So really think of this as primarily for folks in their 60s. It's heavily an empty nester downsizer product. Folks that have decided they don't want to keep up the big house, but they want to stay in their own community where they have their friend network, their church, their gym, etc. This product generally a little bit smaller than what you see in traditional multifamily deals. It usually comes in sizes of more like 150 or 200 units at a time. We see demand for about one of these every sort of 5-year period in your community if you wanted it, if you wanted to accept it. These communities, because of the age restriction and typically because of a little higher service and finish and amenity level, they carry about a 20% premium over conventional apartments. So they come in at an even higher rent level. But they do justify about the same land value. So again, a good potential redevelopment use, good for introducing density where you might be willing to allow it in your community. Any of these higher density products are also good for bringing in more rooftops, obviously, to help support retail, particularly if it's in more of a walkable format. Going down the list, the next product here, also kind of more of a yes.
Sorry to interrupt you again.
No problem.
On the topic of townhomes and apartments, and I like that you broke out the 55 plus. I see under the townhomes, there's a mention of could be a good transitional use from a commercial node to single family. My question is there any insights regarding townhomes and apartments in a mixed use environment? That's something that we've talked about, having a combination of retail, office, and townhome and apartment combinations. Is there any insights you have there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can tell you again, nationally and in the Atlanta region, we see a lot of that. The demographic groups behind really both those product types, townhomes and higher end Class A apartments, it's really driven by two demographic groups. It's driven by your younger millennials and it's driven by your empty nester downsizers. Those two groups, which are kind of opposite ends of the spectrum, but those two groups, it's really interesting because they're generally looking for the same thing. They're looking for walkability, mixed use. They're looking for strong job access, not always walkable, but being kind of closer to some commuting corridors, closer to getting to their jobs. And they're looking for that more convenient lifestyle, that once they get home on a weekend, they can park their car and not have to get back in their car the rest of the weekend kind of thing, right? And so because of that, we typically see both of those products commanding pretty high premiums when they're in those mixed use locations. So from a market standpoint, the majority of these folks are going to prefer that they're in those locations. From a policy standpoint, from a community standpoint, I think it's something to keep in mind because what it does is it helps ensure the success of those districts by building up, again, demand generators, more rooftops, walkable to your retail, particularly in kind of a post-COVID world where more and more people may be working from home going forward. That's daytime population that helps businesses, coffee shops, restaurants get traffic during the middle of the day and the week. So for all those reasons, I think they are more important in those kind of locations.
So as a suggestion, if you could consider a comment or some way of highlighting what you just said in terms of the commanding a greater premium, more stability,
Sure.
For that specific product, because that is something that we've discussed versus, standalone apartment or standalone townhomes.
Yeah, I can definitely talk about that. We work with a lot of other municipalities. We work with Alpharetta, Duluth, Suwanee. We work for lots of different folks. And I can tell you that one of the other conversations we often get into, so I'll mention it now, is the idea that over time, those locations also hold their value more. And so if you think about, apartments as a real estate asset, it is a deteriorating product type. You are going to see it depreciate over time, the structure. And so what you're looking for is, we don't want this 20 years from now or 30 years from now to be a rundown apartment. So how do you fix that? Well, you want it to be in areas where the underlying land value is holding and ideally growing to the point where the value of the entire complex keeps up, and whatever future owner you might have is going to find it financially meaningful to reinvest and keep their property up because the land value is going up, and it's always allowing it to kind of get the sort of top of market audience. So for that reason, we generally recommend these products being in those mixed use locations to help hold their value even more over time.
Okay, thanks again.
I just have a comment because this is exactly the meat that we needed to get to. For example, Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, the product that is being, somewhat contemplated for the Target shopping center in Deerfield. This is the same product, correct? It would be a mixed use with residential over retail.
Exactly. That's exactly what they're proposing there, and
Okay.
And they are going to have structured parking to support it, and I think it's going to be a great illustration. We'll be able to, as a result of this, we'll be able to also inform the committee how many units are proposed there, what the density is, how it looks, and all the other types of uses that we're going to have in this kind of work, live, play kind of neighborhoods.
So
And there's quite a number of potential areas for these things to expand in there, in that area too. So when you're
So
looking
my
at like the Fry Shopping Center and Kohl's and things like that.
So as it stands now, does the Deerfield form-based code support that product, or do we have to change?
No, right now it wholeheartedly supports it, and it's also we're seeing a lot of TDR demand because the way it was structured is, you know, the incentive is, listen, go out and buy all these TDRs and you could really get the density and the massing that you need and the number of units. So it's I think as a result, once this starts taking off in that area, it's also going to drive the TDR program very nicely. You got to remember right now, we're just looking at the improvement, the transportation improvement of Highway 9, which I think is just going to occur first, which is already underway. And once that occurs, the rest of this will just, you know, naturally start to take off. Usually the transportation element improvement would come first.
Bob, I want to follow up on that. I look forward to chatting with you. We don't have to take the time within this group today, but just want to get the thought out there for a future conversation that you and I can have, and you and I, Laura and Todd and some others. And that is, I'm remembering the Deerfield not incident, but the application that came before us. There was, I think, more strict apartment request, and our ordinance intentionally was very strict about the retail component. And it was a large retail component because the objective at the time, and I think still is to minimize the apartment, the traditional apartment, and save ourselves for something more like this. So let's talk some more offline about what our ordinances do or don't allow today and how this fits into the mix of what may have historically been restricted, but this is a better product. So
because I don't want to belabor it because I want to keep going with this, but
yeah,
there is a strong difference too between horizontally integrated mixed use and vertically integrated mixed use. So all of that, well, I'm hoping once we dive into this, we'll be able to really apply it to our current zoning and see how it would actually build out. That's what we were going to propose as our next steps.
Great, thanks, Bob.
Yeah.
My question was, does the steering committee feel that it would be useful to actually create a category of mixed use, similar to how I suggested we divide up the single family? Will that help us distinguish that product?
I think we should have some more conversation about that. I think it absolutely might. I don't want to distract today from where David's going. This is great information, but I think we should definitely put that on our to-do list for team assessment.
So, David, is that something you guys could break out as a category?
Yes and no. It gets a little bit complicated because realistically, the majority of the market that's driving this product wants it to be mixed use. So, but there's some flexibility as to whether that means truly vertically mixed use or whether it's just in a location where they can walk to a coffee shop and a sandwich shop.
Maybe through some of your comments, you can put a finer point on that so that we have, if you will, the support and the data to back that type of product versus a standalone townhome.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'll add a couple other points here. I don't know if I'm taking up too much time or not, but there's a couple other interesting points that I think might come up relative to this apartment discussion. So I'll throw them out there now because I've seen it come across in every municipality we work in. The first is, keep in mind today's luxury Class A apartments, which at these rent levels, that's what this is. The demographic that goes into these is very different than what some constituents might think. Some folks aren't as aware of apartments, particularly if you have an older demographic, they might be thinking about the apartments that they knew 40, 50 years ago. And it's very different. We actually did an analysis for Alpharetta where we looked at the demographics of the folks living in the 2 apartment buildings in Avalon and found that they had greater affluence than the residents in the city of Alpharetta. And so, you know, in most cases, these renters at this rent level are median incomes of north of 100,000. And so it's different than sometimes what people have in their mind. And so to the extent you all need or want us to help explain that, we're happy to do that. Another piece I'll mention is different municipalities we've seen still have some hesitancy about, well, how much apartments is enough? How much is too much? We want to be careful about this. I've seen everyone set different kinds of policy related to that one. I'm not going to say what is right. That's up to your community to decide. But I will say this, I would focus more on what is the right location for us to put these in our community, where they're going to hold their value over time, and not necessarily let's cap it at a certain number, right? Because I would view an apartment building that's not in a mixed-use location very differently than I would view an apartment building in a mixed-use location. So that's something I would keep in mind as well. And the other thing, and I'll stop beating down this door, but the other thing is the market cycle of this stuff. Even if you're getting inundated with apartment requests right now, don't just be afraid of that and say, whoa, this is too much, we need to hit the brakes, we need to stop, because it might not be the same in 5 years from now. It might not be the same in 10 years from now. And as we're looking at a comprehensive plan that has this long of a life, we need to keep in mind the fact that we're in the strongest multifamily cycle we've seen in 3 decades right now. So maybe it's okay to get a bunch of apartments now, because we might then go into a 20-year lull where we don't have it again. So that's just something to keep in mind as we think about this. All right, I'm going to continue moving down just for time's sake here. So next is senior housing, senior product type. We kind of lump this into 2 categories, independent living and assisted living. That's what these initials are right here. Typically in the market today, you normally see these built together. They're normally built in a facility that offers both, and that enables for kind of graduating in place. They are usually built in about 90 to 100 bed facility sizes. We do see the need for one immediately in your area, so you have the potential for another one in this 5-year period. And then you're generally going to see a rate of about 1 per every 5 years. These things, as you know, they're quite expensive, but that has more to do with the service level of what's required than it is necessarily the real estate. They actually can pay pretty decent amount for their land, and I think it's an important part of keeping in mind within community growth. Finally, getting into commercial here, we've got retail broken out from office. Retail, as we all know, has...
Can I just jump in quick? I just want to make
Yeah.
sure I remind the steering committee that with the use that he just spoke about, there's other factors too, because they're very, very demanding on other services like fire, police, like especially on fire, as far as call volumes and things like that. So when we look at these things and where they are, we also have to look at the support that we have around.
That's a great point.
That would cover those things, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. They obviously, at these kind of higher pricing levels, they also really help support property tax. So something to keep in mind. All right, moving on to commercial here. So retail, I was just talking about, even before the pandemic, retail was extremely challenged with the rise of online shopping and all of the bankruptcies that we're seeing with national tenants. So it's very difficult. Most areas we work in are over retailed. Milton is not over retailed, but you have, kind of an unequal distribution throughout the city of where the retail is. So that's something to keep in mind. Going forward, retail is going to be really hard. You're not going to see, something like half the standard tenants we used to see are gone. And it's going to continue that way. So what retail is really becoming is much more food and beverage, restaurants, coffee shops, things like that. Don't just think of high-end, nice sit-down restaurants. It's also the sandwich shop, things like that. The fast casuals are really powerful and growing a lot right now. So food and beverage, as well as what we call population servicing retail. So population servicing is like the fitness concepts and some of the medical concepts and, things like that. That's the majority of what you're going to see. It's going to be kind of in line with your population growth, about 140,000 square feet over this next 5-year period. Because the retail model has changed, you may see 1 or 2 more grocery store anchors, with your growth. But for the most part, this stuff doesn't have the traditional anchors that they used to have. We're not talking about a department store or a junior anchor. So what happens is they want to go into kind of restaurant, food and beverage concentrations. And so that is pushing the mixed-use concept as well, where they can help ride off that traffic, where you come, grab coffee, and then you might spend your retail dollar and pick up a pair of pants or something while you're there, kind of thing. So for that reason, this is really going to want to be grouped together. It doesn't necessarily have to be mixed use, but mixed use element really helps ensure the success of that retail. Again, greater rooftops in closer proximity to it. This is kind of shows the retail numbers and sort of the amount of land value they can support there. One comment on the land value here, you'll certainly see some retailers, particularly on out parcels, things like that, pay much more than this. This is meant to be kind of more like if a developer is doing an entire kind of retail center, what kind of land value would it be at? Okay, moving on, conventional office. We're showing about 105,000 feet of demand over the next 5 years. Most of this is also going to be what we call, again, population servicing, medical, banking, investment, that kind of stuff. We do think that Deerfield is a little bit different. Deerfield has, because of the older product type there, it has kind of lost market share to other areas along the 400 corridor in the North Fulton office market. We think it has the potential to the North Fulton market is booming and there's a lot of office growth there. Deerfield has the potential to harness some of that, but it needs new product and it needs a refresh on kind of the entire Deerfield area. If that were to occur, you could see significantly higher growth in this product type, but there's got to be some changes put forth. There is a pretty major site, I think it's like Deerfield 2 or something over there, that is, advertising, trying to land a build-to-suit tenant. You might see that happen as well. But until we have a little bit of a refresh in Deerfield, I don't think you're going to see significant captures of office absorption there.
David, is it look and feel more than content? What I mean by that is the traditional companies are changing, like the large corporations where everybody went to the office every day. That's changed obviously because of COVID. You guys will know better than we do about what that forecast might look like in the coming years. My forecast, my personal taste, uneducated by the industry, just a personal opinion, is that it's going to stay down for quite a while. So in your comment, Deerfield, with what's aged there, I think about what's there. It's low profile, probably 1-story, large footprint, and inside is just open to be built to whatever the solution might be. Is the interior product going to be different in the future?
There's some changes with the interior product, but not a lot. Our belief on this, and we've read a lot of the research papers and following a lot of this data, and no one knows for sure yet, but But for the most part, it's the tech industry that is probably not going to return to the conventional office model. They're going to be more heavy work from home. But a lot of the other industries seem like they're going to head back to more traditional office roles. Now, I think you might see them increase their amount of work from home. Maybe it's 1 day a week, 2 days a week, something like that. And so from that, you might have a decrease of, we need 20% less space. But we've also heard the argument and seeing this play out with some of the newer leases being negotiated now that, as an industry, we had gotten to where we were packing more people into an office. The old standard used to be about 3 per 1,000. We've been getting up to more like 5 per 1,000, and tech industry is even higher than that. And so the thought is we might just kind of revert back. They still might take the same square footage, but instead of packing in at 5 per 1,000, we might come back to 4 per 1,000 or 3 per 1,000. So I don't think you're going to see the office market have a significant slowdown, for a protracted period of time. We think it might be down about 20% for the next year or two, but we do think it's going to come back. I don't think this is a lasting impact. There are some changes on the interior of the product. The primary one that we're seeing is folks wanting more outdoor space. So whether that's designed in, individual terraces off suites or rooftop terraces on buildings, or just better design of kind of common areas on the site. If you're only, a low 1, 2, 3-story building, you might have more courtyards and trail systems and parks even on their parcel. But the majority of it is really two things. And I know I sound like a broken record with mixed use, but that is the industry today. That is real estate today. Even the office tenants, that's what they're looking for. Yeah. They're looking for, the ability for folks to be able to walk to a coffee shop, walk to lunch, walk to happy hour afterwards. And so they're looking for these more mixed use locations. And, some of what you see in Deerfield is the old suburban model where, sure, you might have the big box shopping center, a few blocks down the road, but nobody's walking from the office building to that big box center because they've got to cross a sea of, 1 acre of asphalt parking. And so no one's doing that. So it's kind of reimagining the old suburban office park model. And a lot of that means injecting retail and rooftops into the office park to help with that vibrancy and that mix of uses. So I think that's it. The other big thing, and this was huge for us when we did some work in Alpharetta, is the competition for talent. So all of these firms are trying to, part of the reason why they're looking for these mixed use environments is that's what their employees are wanting. And the people they're trying to hire as their employees want that. So it's become an office perk, a benefit. And so they all need to find that. But related to that and this search for talent is, most of the talent is millennials and today, and the millennials, just where they are in life can only afford so much for their housing product. So that really ties to what we're doing in Milton with our housing policy, with the housing products that you allow in your community. If we don't have the millennial audience here, then it's going to stunt our office growth. We're not going to see as many of these office tenants choosing to come here because they don't have the workforce. Or if you get that office tenant, their workforce is having to commute in and out every day, and it creates a greater traffic congestion problem. So, something that a lot of municipalities are really focusing on is making sure that we have the proper housing policy and housing products for that workforce so that we can attract the office tenants. So I think that's really important. There was a big site across from Avalon that missed out on a major office tenant because there was not enough millennial housing product in Alpharetta. And that tenant moved into Midtown because of it. And it was a major loss for Alpharetta. Not saying, we have to go that far, but it's just something to keep in mind that, policy decision impacts jobs as well. housing policy decision. All right, final use on here, and then we can open it up to more questions. But lodging, obviously this market's been hit extremely hard with COVID, and we don't see that market coming back. It's going to take about 4 to 5 years in most cases for that market to come back. You all don't have a very mature lodging market in Milton anyway, primarily because of your distance off the 400 corridor. Of course, you'll see some of it around Deerfield, but that market's just been hit so hard, and you actually have a significant amount of pipeline, not necessarily in Milton, not in Deerfield, but if we look at the whole sort of 400 corridor, you've got a couple new hotels coming online that were already under construction, you know, pre-pandemic, so they're still moving forward in Alpharetta. You've got the big new one, obviously, at Windward, and so, you know, just given how hard that industry has been hit and the amount of new room count you already have coming in the pipeline, we don't see potential for a new hotel anywhere in Milton in the next 5-year period. Now, final thing I'll mention, again, everything I've been sort of walking through is kind of 5-year period. Obviously, in a comprehensive plan, we have to take this out further. As we think about the next 5-year period and the next 5-year period and the next 5-year period, that's where we really need to think about, well, how much land do we have left? What are we going to change with our policy? How might we influence the trajectory of these different land uses? And so that's kind of why we've put pause on forecasting out further for now. But as we go through this process with you all and the team, we will add that into this.
David, I've got another quick question on that. Do you guys contemplate the VRBO Airbnb marketplace in any of this when you're looking at the lodging aspect of the measure?
Yeah, I mean, at a high level, we do. I think that certainly had an impact on the industry, and part of what is, you know, dragging out its recovery has something to do with it. We haven't gotten as specific at looking at, you know, any of the short-term rental data in Milton. I don't get the sense that it's that large of a market for you all there. I could be wrong, but I don't get the sense that that's a major factor for your market. But I do think it's part of what's just keeping the overall lodging market down.
Okay, thank you.
I think, David, I think it will grow. And just because Milton is considered such a safe place, people want to come here to stay. So I would just encourage, you know, to maybe we can look into that as a city. We need to probably consider harnessing, you know, tax revenue from that going forward. So
I also have a question, and it's related in the sense that with our large lots and what we're thinking about in terms of the equestrian zoning options and creating additional uses maybe on some of these larger lots, which may include events and possibly overnight stays, which would, I guess, fall into the category of bed and breakfast, or maybe it is Airbnb type. But is there a section of this study that would encompass that, or is it off to the side, or how can we incorporate looking at that and seeing how viable that product would be?
That's a good question. Let me take a look at that. That's the first we've kind of really been thinking about that. I didn't realize that was a primary concern or focus for you all, but there's some data sources that we can get that track that, so we can see sort of how much activity is happening currently in Milton. So we could take a look at that and we can try to project that out. So let me dig into that a little further.
Hey, David, just out of curiosity, or Michelle, was Noel involved in prior CPAC studies? Seems like
well, I know Noel was involved with the placemaking plan, crabapple
Yeah,
placemaking.
for crabapple. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, that's
But in terms of the 2016 plan, were they engaged?
I don't think so, Todd.
Okay.
No, we
No.
didn't have consultants.
Well, David, kudos. You've got good insights into our city based on your analysis. You clearly have done your homework.
Yeah, this is great.
Well, it's not just me, it's the team, but yes, thank you.
Yeah, well, Tate, I'll tip my hat to you too. I'm sure you crunched a lot of the data and came up with these insights.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for watching what we hope was a very informative set of presentations. Now you might be thinking, what's next? How can I build off and add to what I've seen here? And generally, how can I add my own thoughts related to the 2040 Comprehensive Plan? Well, during the next CPAC meeting on January 28th, you will have a chance to add to this discussion. Maybe it'll be about something you saw on the videos, or it'll be about something else. And this won't be the only chance that you have. As the months roll on, we will have several more targeted sessions, some of them focused on topics you've heard about today. We hope that watching this video presentation will leave you more informed and more engaged. Thank you, as always, for your dedication to this process and to the City of Milton. See you again on January 28th.